The air was thick with smoke, an oppressive weight that clung to everything around it. The fire crackled and roared, devouring everything in its path as the flames licked the sky. The building, once a home full of memories, was now just a shell of destruction. Firefighters raced in and out, their movements swift and practiced, but nothing could prepare them for what they were about to face. At the heart of the inferno, one firefighter, Lieutenant Sam Carter, stood frozen. His eyes were wide with disbelief. In the midst of the smoke and chaos, he saw it, a figure darting through the flames. It was a dog, a mother, her fur singed and smoking as she ran toward the heart of the fire, determined and fearless. Her eyes locked on him for a split second before she disappeared into the flames again. "Where's she going?" Sam murmured, his breath thick with the acrid smoke. He had seen many things in his years as a firefighter, but this was different. No one would be running toward the fire, especially not a dog. Without thinking, he moved, pushing past his fellow firefighters who shouted at him to stay back. But Sam wasn't the kind of man to sit idle while there was someone, or something, in need of help. His heart was racing as he followed the dog's trail into the flames. The fire was a beast, relentless and unforgiving, but Sam wasn't afraid. He had seen fires of this magnitude before, and he knew how to handle them. But what he didn't know was that this fire held a secret, one that would shake him to his core. Inside the burning building, the air was thick with heat and smoke. It was nearly impossible to see anything through the haze, but Sam's focus was singular. He couldn't let that dog go alone. He had to find her. He pushed through the flames, each step feeling heavier than the last. The heat was suffocating, but Sam's training kicked in. He kept his head down, eyes scanning for any sign of movement. The dog had to be here somewhere. But why? Why would she run back into the fire? What was she trying to find? His radio crackled to life, but he didn't have the time to listen. The urgency was suffocating him, and the fire was growing stronger by the second. He could hear the crackling of wood, the distant thud of collapsing walls. But in the midst of it all, he heard something else, a soft whimper. He paused. The sound was faint, almost drowned out by the fury of the flames. But it was there, and it was coming from deeper within the building. Without a second thought, Sam sprinted in that direction, his heart pounding as he pushed through the smoke. What he saw when he reached the source of the sound took his breath away. The dog was there, standing in front of a wall of flames. Her fur was singed, her eyes wide with panic. But she was standing her ground, staring at something behind the fire. Sam's gaze followed hers, and his heart sank. Behind the flames was a small, trembling figure, a puppy, barely old enough to open its eyes, whimpering in fear. The mother dog wasn't running toward the fire to escape. She was running toward the heat, to her pup. Sam's mind raced. He knew he couldn't leave them here. The fire was too intense, and there was no way they would make it out without help. But how could he reach them? He glanced around, his eyes searching for any possible escape route, any way to reach the two animals before the flames consumed them. But the fire was everywhere, and the heat was unbearable. He had to make a choice, one that would change everything. The mother dog growled low in her throat, her body tense, as if daring the flames to come closer. Sam's heart broke as he realized just how much she was willing to sacrifice. She wasn't just a mother protecting her young. She was willing to face certain death to save her pup. "Hang on," Sam muttered, his voice barely audible over the roar of the fire. He rushed forward, pushing through the flames, his body moving on instinct. Sweat poured down his face as he reached out toward the dog and her pup. But just as his hand closed around the small creature, something shifted. The roof above them groaned, a deafening sound that was quickly followed by the cracking of timber. Sam barely had time to react before the entire ceiling caved in, sending a shower of burning debris down around them. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and burning wood, and for a moment it felt as though time had slowed to a crawl. Sam Carter's chest heaved with every breath, his muscles aching from the adrenaline coursing through his veins. His hand still clutched the small, trembling puppy, now safe in his arms. Behind him, the flames were closing in. The fires roared like a beast hungry for its next meal. But despite the danger, despite the impossible odds, Sam felt a fierce protectiveness that had nothing to do with his job and everything to do with the bond he had formed in that brief moment. The mother dog stood still, watching him from across the burning room. Her eyes were full of fear for her pup, fear for what would come next. But they also held something else, a deep sense of trust. Sam had never known the kind of loyalty this dog seemed to possess. It was the kind of loyalty that didn't ask questions, that didn't hesitate. It was the kind of loyalty that could move mountains, or, in this case, run straight into a raging fire to save her child. In all his years as a firefighter, Sam had never seen anything like it. And as he gazed at the dog, the realization hit him harder than any impact he'd ever felt in the line of duty. This wasn't just a rescue mission. This was something far bigger. It was about connection, about the raw instinct that bound a mother to her child, no matter the danger. And it was about a man who, for all his training, had never understood the true meaning of sacrifice until now. His mind flashed back to his own childhood. Growing up in a small town, where his parents had always emphasized the importance of family. His mother, a loving but tough woman, had worked tirelessly to keep the family together. And his father, a man of few words, had shown love through actions, even if he didn't know how to say it. Sam had always admired their strength, their dedication. But seeing the dog in front of him, her willingness to run into the fire without hesitation, made him question whether he had ever truly understood what it meant to sacrifice everything for the ones you love. As Sam backed up toward the door with the puppy cradled in his arms, he caught sight of the mother dog again. She was standing still, watching him, the flames licking the edges of her fur, her body tense with fear and anticipation. She wasn't asking for help. She was waiting for him to make the next move. But Sam knew what she wanted. She wanted her pup safe. And she wasn't going to leave the building until she knew that was going to happen. "You're a brave one, aren't you?" Sam whispered to her, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "But I'm not leaving without you." He knew it was crazy. He knew he should turn back, that he had already done more than anyone could expect. But something inside him, a feeling he couldn't explain, told him that leaving this dog behind wasn't an option. Not today. The sound of his fellow firefighters calling out to him reached his ears, but he ignored them. He focused only on the mother dog, whose gaze never wavered from his. As he approached her, Sam couldn't help but notice the state of the dog. Her fur was singed and tattered, and there were patches of burnt skin visible under the soot. But despite the damage, her eyes held a quiet strength, an unspoken message that no words could convey. She was in pain, yes, but it was the pain of a mother who would sacrifice anything for her child. And as Sam reached out for her, he realized he would do the same for her. For a moment, everything stood still. The world outside, the fire, the smoke, the crackling of the collapsing structure, faded into the background. All that existed was Sam, the dog, and the burning room around them. It was as if time had granted him this one chance, this one moment, to do something that mattered. The mother dog let out a soft growl as Sam reached out to her, a sign of acceptance, as though she knew he was there to help. She turned slightly, her body still stiff with tension, and then moved closer to him, her tail wagging weakly despite the dire situation. Sam took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. The door was just a few feet away. He could hear the other firefighters shouting his name, urging him to move quickly. But Sam didn't move. He couldn't. The dog had made her choice. And now, it was his turn to make his. "Let's get you out of here," he murmured softly, his hand shaking slightly as he knelt to scoop her up. The mother dog didn't resist. She simply allowed him to lift her, her body leaning into his chest as if she trusted him completely. And as Sam stood, holding both the mother dog and the puppy in his arms, he realized that this wasn't just a rescue. It was a moment of profound connection, one that would change him forever. As Sam made his way toward the door, the fire continued to rage behind him. But for the first time that day, the heat didn't matter. All that mattered was getting the mother and her pup to safety. And for the first time in his life, Sam felt like he understood what true courage looked like. Sam's heart was pounding as he cradled the mother dog and her puppy in his arms, their fragile bodies pressed close to his chest. The heat of the fire was almost unbearable, but he didn't stop. His only focus was on getting out, getting them both to safety. The noise around him, the crackling of the fire, the distant shouts of his team, was all but drowned out by the steady rhythm of his own breath. Each step he took felt heavier, his legs feeling as though they were made of lead. But he couldn't stop. Not now. The door was so close. He could almost reach it, could almost feel the cool air on the other side. But just as he thought he might make it out, the building groaned. It was a low, ominous sound that made his stomach drop. Sam's instincts kicked in, and he glanced up, scanning the ceiling. The beams above him were shifting, straining under the heat, and he knew that one wrong move could bring the whole building down on top of him. "Sam!" A voice shouted from the doorway. It was Captain Harris, one of his most trusted colleagues. "You need to get out of there. Now!" But Sam didn't answer. He couldn't. His focus was entirely on the door. There was no time for conversation, no time for anything except getting these animals to safety. As if on cue, the ground beneath him shook. Sam felt it first as a tremor that rippled through his legs, then heard it, a loud cracking sound that echoed through the building. Without warning, a portion of the ceiling above him caved in, sending a rain of burning debris crashing to the floor just inches from his feet. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. He couldn't go back. There was no way around it now. The fire was closing in, and there was only one way out. The doorway ahead of him seemed impossibly far away, a barrier between him and the safety of the outside world. But Sam wasn't going to let fear stop him. He wasn't going to let this fire claim these lives, not after everything the mother dog had done. He had made a promise. He wasn't leaving her or the pup behind. "Hold on," Sam whispered, though he wasn't sure if anyone could hear him over the roar of the fire. He shifted the weight of the puppy in his arms, feeling the fragile life shiver against his chest. The mother dog was still by his side, her body stiff with tension as she carefully navigated the collapsing structure around them. The fire was everywhere now, its claws reaching out toward them from every direction. Sam could feel the heat searing his skin as he moved forward, each step sending a burst of adrenaline through his veins. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. As Sam neared the doorway, he saw something that stopped him cold, a wall of flames. It was a new fire, one that had flared up so quickly it hadn't been there just moments before. The heat from it was intense, even from where he stood. It was impossible to pass through. The room was closing in. The exit was blocked. Desperation clawed at him. He glanced around, but there was nowhere to turn. The walls were closing in, the flames licking at his heels. He was trapped. The mother dog let out a sharp bark, as if sensing his panic. Sam glanced down at her, and in that moment, he saw something in her eyes. There was no fear. There was only determination. It was as if she was telling him something he couldn't ignore. There was a small window on the far side of the room, half obscured by smoke and flames. Sam's heart sank when he saw it. It was small, barely big enough for an adult to fit through. But he had to try. It was their only hope. He quickly shifted the puppy to one arm, wrapping it carefully in his jacket to protect it from the heat. With his other hand, he grabbed the mother dog, holding her tight as they moved toward the window. The fire was roaring around them, but Sam wasn't focused on it anymore. His only focus was on the escape. The window frame was tight, but it was their last chance. Sam pushed against it, the heat from the flames growing more intense by the second. He had to get them out. He had to get them to safety. The window gave way with a creak of protest. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Sam turned and crawled through, pushing the mother dog and the puppy ahead of him. His body was trembling from the heat, his limbs stiff with exhaustion, but there was no time to rest. He could hear the walls around him groaning, the fire closing in. And then, just as they reached the outside, the ground beneath them shook again, stronger this time. Sam didn't stop. He pulled the dog and puppy with him, his heart in his throat as he ran toward the safety of the street. Behind him, the building collapsing on itself, the fire exploding outward in a blinding wave of heat. The shockwave hit them with full force, knocking Sam off balance. He stumbled, nearly losing his footing, but he didn't stop. He didn't even think. When Sam finally reached the safety of the fire trucks, gasping for breath, he collapsed to his knees, his chest heaving. His heart was racing, but he couldn't stop looking at the mother dog, who now stood before him, her eyes watching him with a sense of quiet gratitude. And then, without warning, the puppy in his arms stirred. Its tiny body shivered, but it was alive and safe. Sam's breath hitched in his throat. His heart swelled with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. They had made it. But as he looked at the dog, her fur singed, her eyes full of pain and love, he realized something. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a moment of understanding, of shared courage, a bond forged in the heat of the fire. He had risked everything for this dog, and in doing so, he had found something he hadn't realized he'd been searching for all along. The night air was cold against Sam's sweat-soaked skin, a sharp contrast to the heat that had gripped him inside the burning building. He knelt on the sidewalk, the mother dog and her puppy safely in his arms, both of them exhausted but alive. The flashing lights of the fire trucks illuminated the darkened street, the sounds of sirens and distant chatter filling the night. But none of it seemed real to Sam. All he could focus on were the quiet, steady breaths of the dog in his arms, and the tiny, fragile whimper from the puppy that had become his world in the span of a few minutes. Sam had seen many rescues in his time as a firefighter, but none had been like this. None had struck so deeply into his soul, forcing him to question everything he had ever known about courage, sacrifice, and love. The mother dog was still trembling, her burnt fur singeing in patches where the flames had touched her. But her eyes, those eyes, were filled with gratitude, loyalty, and something else. It was as though, in that moment, she understood the weight of the choice Sam had made. She hadn't asked for help. She hadn't begged for salvation. She had simply done what any mother would do. She had run toward the fire to save her child, no matter the cost. Sam's thoughts were interrupted by a gentle touch on his shoulder. He turned to find Captain Harris standing beside him, his face etched with concern. "You did good, Sam. You saved them," Harris said, his voice low and steady, as if he were trying to ground Sam in the reality of the situation. But Sam didn't feel grounded. He felt like he was floating, disconnected from everything around him. His mind kept drifting back to the fire, the dog, the courage she had displayed. He didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded, his throat tight with emotion. It was hard to put into words the intensity of what had just happened, the bond that had formed between him and the animals in that blazing inferno. "Sam," Harris began again, his tone shifting. "There's something you need to know. We just got the report. That fire, it was set deliberately." Sam's eyes widened. For a moment, it didn't register. He stared at Harris, waiting for the information to sink in. "What?" Sam muttered, his voice a hoarse whisper. "The fire was arson," Harris continued, his expression grim. "It wasn't an accident. Someone did this on purpose." The revelation hit Sam like a ton of bricks. His mind spun, trying to make sense of the chaos. Who would set a fire like this? Why? What kind of person would go to such lengths to put lives at risk? But as the gravity of the situation settled in, Sam felt his anger flare. It wasn't just about the fire anymore. It was about the pain and suffering caused by a person's cruelty, the lives destroyed in the blink of an eye. He had seen it too many times, homes burned to the ground, families left shattered. But now, it was personal. It was the mother dog and her pup who had been at the mercy of someone's malicious act. Before he could say anything, the puppy in his arms let out a soft whimper. Sam looked down and saw its tiny eyes blink open for the first time. The sight made his heart swell with a mix of relief and joy. The little one was alive, safe, and that was all that mattered. The mother dog licked the puppy's face gently, as though to reassure it, as though she could sense that the danger had passed. Her actions were calm now, her body less tense, but her protective instincts were still sharp. Sam watched them for a moment, the bond between the two animals palpable, and felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. "Thank you," Sam whispered to the dog, his voice thick with emotion. "You've shown me something I never truly understood. It wasn't just about being brave. It wasn't just about putting others first. It was about the kind of love that transcended fear. The kind of love that made a mother run into the flames, knowing that her own survival didn't matter as long as her child was safe." Harris cleared his throat, his voice tinged with sympathy. "Sam, you're going to need to take some time off after this. I think the department owes you a lot more than just a well done." Sam didn't answer right away. He couldn't. His mind was elsewhere, drifting back to the fire, back to the dog. But as he gazed at the tiny puppy now curled up in his arms, a soft, peaceful expression on its face, something inside him shifted. This wasn't just a job. This wasn't just another day at the firehouse. This was about making a difference, about showing up for those who needed it the most, even when the odds seemed impossible. He glanced at the mother dog, who was now resting her head on his knee, exhausted but content. And then, without warning, she looked up at him, her eyes full of trust. "I've got you," Sam whispered. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." The weight of his promise hung in the air, and for the first time in a long while, Sam felt that familiar sense of purpose. It wasn't just about fighting fires anymore. It was about fighting for what was right, about standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. As he sat there, the sounds of the fire trucks, the shouting of his colleagues, the distant hum of the city all faded into the background. It was just him, the mother dog, and the puppy. And in that moment, Sam knew that no matter what happened next, he had found something he hadn't even realized he was searching for, a reason to keep going. The days that followed the fire felt like a blur. The adrenaline had worn off, and the physical and emotional exhaustion settled in. Sam found himself replaying the events in his mind over and over again, how he had charged into the inferno without hesitation, how the mother dog had trusted him to do the impossible, and how, in the end, it had been her bravery that had saved them all. In the weeks that followed, Sam visited the mother dog and her pup every day. He couldn't bear to leave them. They had become part of his life in ways he never expected. He'd spent his entire career saving lives, but this rescue, this one, felt different. He had been part of something bigger than himself, something that transcended his role as a firefighter. The mother dog, now named Luna by the family who had taken her in, had recovered remarkably well. Her burns had healed, and though she still had scars, she was stronger than ever. The puppy, who had been so fragile in the beginning, had grown into a lively, curious little creature with boundless energy. She had even started playing with the other dogs at the shelter, chasing them around and wagging her tail, a sight that brought a smile to Sam's face every time. But it wasn't just the physical healing that had struck Sam. It was the emotional recovery, both for him and for Luna. When Sam first met her, she had been consumed by fear, her instincts driven solely by the need to protect her pup. She had been willing to face a roaring fire, without thinking twice, just to keep her child safe. And now, as Sam sat on the porch with her, her head resting on his knee, there was a sense of peace between them, a sense of understanding. Luna no longer paced nervously, her eyes no longer darting around in search of threats. She had learned that there were people who cared for her, who would help her when things seemed impossible. She had learned to trust again, just as Sam had learned to trust himself. That bond, formed in the chaos of the fire, had shaped both of their lives in ways neither of them could have imagined. One evening, As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the yard, Sam sat with Luna and the puppy, now named Bella. He watched them both, so full of life and joy, and felt an overwhelming surge of emotion wash over him. The kind of emotion that made his chest tighten and his eyes sting. It was a mixture of gratitude and awe, of knowing that he had witnessed something extraordinary. "Look at you," Sam murmured, his voice soft. "You've come a long way, haven't you?" Luna looked up at him, her eyes full of affection, and in that moment, Sam realized something profound. The journey he had been on with these two, through the fire, through the fear, through the uncertainty, had taught him more than he could have ever learned it in a classroom or from any textbook. It had taught him about unconditional love, about sacrifice, about the courage to face something terrifying, even when it seems impossible. In the past, Sam had always believed that heroes wore uniforms and carried badges, that they were the ones who ran toward danger while everyone else ran away. But Luna had shown him a different kind of heroism. She had shown him that real bravery wasn't about fighting fires or saving lives. It was about facing your fears head-on, protecting the ones you love, and never backing down, no matter the cost. As the puppy, Bella, crawled onto his lap and snuggled close, Sam's heart swelled with emotion. He had no idea that one simple act of bravery, running into a fire to save her pup, could change his life so completely. It wasn't just about rescuing Luna and Bella. It was about the lessons they had taught him, lessons that would stay with him for the rest of his life. And as the three of them sat there, the evening growing cooler and the sounds of the world fading into the background, Sam realized that, in some strange way, Luna had saved him too. She had shown him what it meant to truly live, to fight for something greater than yourself, and to find purpose in the moments when life seemed darkest. For Sam, the story wasn't just about a firefighter rescuing a dog. It was about a shared journey of healing, sacrifice, and understanding. It was about finding strength in the unlikeliest of places, and about learning to trust that, no matter how big the fire, there was always a way out if you didn't give up. Luna's tail wagged slowly as she rested her head against Sam's knee. He smiled, his hand gently stroking her fur, feeling the warmth of the bond they shared. It wasn't just a rescue. It was a moment that had shaped both of their lives, forever. Sam didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace, a sense that everything was as it should be. And he knew, without a doubt, that he would carry the lessons of Luna's bravery with him, always. Thank you for watching this incredible journey of courage, sacrifice, and the deep bond between a mother and her pup. If you were moved by this story, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others who need to hear this heartfelt message, and leave a comment below to share your thoughts. We would love to hear how this story impacted you. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more emotional stories that will tug at your heartstrings. Together, we can continue to share these unforgettable moments that remind us of the strength within us all. Stay brave, stay kind, and we'll see you in the next story.